Andromeda looks harmless, a faint blur in the night sky, a soft spiral barely visible without effort. Something you could miss entirely if you didn't know where to look. That is the illusion. Because at cosmic scales, distance does not mean separation, and far away does not mean irrelevant. Andromeda is not waiting. It is not approaching in some distant future. It is already involved. Before we go any further, pause for a moment. If you enjoy videos that challenge intuition instead of comforting it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what too close even means in a universe this large. Now listen carefully. The human brain was never designed to understand scale. It evolved to judge threats across meters, not millions of light years. It understands speed when something runs toward you. It understands danger when something gets louder, brighter, closer. But the universe does not operate on those cues. At cosmic scales, the most important processes are silent. They do not accelerate dramatically. They do not announce themselves. They simply continue. Andromeda is more than 2 million light years away. That number sounds enormous, comforting, as if it places Andromeda safely outside relevance. But numbers alone do not define influence. Gravity does. Gravity does not behave the way intuition expects. It does not stop at borders. It does not weaken politely and disappear. It fades slowly, relentlessly, across unimaginable distances. Every star inside Andromeda contributes to its gravitational field, not individually in a way you could point to, but collectively as mass. Mass bends space-time, and that curvature does not remain local. It propagates. Right now, the Milky Way does not sit in neutral space. It sits inside a distorted gravitational landscape shaped by multiple galaxies, Andromeda being the dominant one. That distortion is subtle. You will never see it directly, but stars feel it. Gas clouds feel it. Dark matter responds to it. Andromeda is not a distant object, acting later. It is part of the environment now. This is where intuition fails. We imagine space as empty distance, a gap that protects us, a buffer. But gravity turns space itself into a medium. Once two massive objects exist within the same gravitational domain, distance becomes delay, not separation. Andromeda and the Milky Way are already gravitationally bound. That single fact changes everything, because binding means inevitability. When two galaxies of this mass become bound, there's no scenario where they simply drift apart again. They may spiral slowly. They may orbit imperfectly. They may stretch and deform for billions of years. But separation is no longer an option. The outcome is not uncertain. Only the path is. This is why calling the collision a future event is misleading. It suggests something that has not yet begun. In reality, it began the moment gravity made escape impossible. That moment is long past. We often picture motion as something visible. We imagine Andromeda racing toward us through space. That image is wrong. The approach is not dramatic. It is quiet, measured not in speed, but in commitment. Gravity does not rush. It accumulates. Every orbit slightly shifts. Every trajectory bends imperceptibly. Nothing looks wrong. Nothing feels urgent. That is how inevitability hides. If Andromeda were suddenly removed, truly erased, the Milky Way would not immediately return to neutrality. Its stars would continue moving as if Andromeda still existed. For millions of years, that alone should disturb you. It means the present is shaped by the past, not the now. It means influence arrives long after cause. We are not reacting to Andromeda as it is. We are embedded in the consequences of what it was. This breaks a deeply held assumption, the assumption that distance equals independence. At cosmic scales, distance only determines how delayed the consequences are. Andromeda's gravity has been shaping the Milky Way's outer structure since before Earth formed. Not violently, not dramatically, but persistently. The outskirts of our galaxy move differently because Andromeda exists. Dark matter halos overlap. Orbital paths shift. Nothing catastrophic, nothing cinematic, just alignment. This is why scale matters. At small scales, change requires force. At large scales, time does the work. Processes that act slowly over vast durations are the most reliable ones in the universe. They face no resistance. No explosion will stop gravity. No civilization will interfere with it. No technology will alter its trajectory. Gravity does not negotiate. It does not adapt. It only accumulates. This is why billions of years does not mean unlikely. It means unstoppable. Humans think in moments. The universe thinks in inevitabilities. When astronomers say Andromeda will collide with the Milky Way, they are not predicting an event. They are describing a consequence already locked in by physics. The details may vary. The timing may stretch beyond comprehension, but the destination is fixed. Two galaxies, this massive, do not casually pass by each other. Once their gravitational wells overlap deeply enough, they cannot disengage. They can stretch. They can distort. They can tear stars from each other, but they cannot separate. This is what too close really means. Not proximity, commitment. Andromeda is already too close because escape is no longer possible. The universe does not care how long something takes, only whether it can be avoided. This cannot. That realization is uncomfortable because it reframes danger. Danger is no longer something approaching. It is something already underway. We are not waiting for Andromeda. We are inside the process. The slowest collision in the universe is not a future threat. It is a present condition unfolding quietly. Nothing about this will feel urgent in a human lifetime. That does not make it hypothetical. It makes it indifferent to us. This is the deeper problem with scale. At cosmic distances, cause and effect decouple from experience. Things can be guaranteed without ever being witnessed. Processes can complete without observation. Andromeda does not need to hurry. Time is irrelevant to gravity. This galaxy has had billions of years to act, and it will have billions more. The Milky Way is not preparing. It is already responding, subtly, continuously, irreversibly. That is why far away stops meaning what you think it means. Because once gravity binds two systems, distance is no longer a defense. It is only a countdown measured in eras instead of seconds. Andromeda is not close in the way danger feels close. It is close in the way fate is close. Already decided, already moving, already reshaping the space we occupy. If distance does not protect you, then scale becomes the real problem. Not size, not brightness. Scale. Scale is where intuition collapses completely. At human scales, distance behaves predictably. If something is far away, it takes time to reach you. If it moves slowly, you feel safe. At cosmic scales, those rules stop applying in any meaningful way. Because the universe does not measure influence in moments. It measures it in persistence. Gravity is not an action. It is a condition. Once mass exists, gravity exists. There is no on or off. There is no burst and then silence. It is continuous. And continuity is what breaks intuition. We are used to thinking in events. Something happens, then it stops. But gravity does not happen. It remains. Andromeda does not need to move quickly to matter. It does not need to arrive dramatically. It only needs to exist. The mistake people make is imagining space as a void that weakens everything inside it. But space is not empty in the way we think. It is structured. Space-time itself bends, stretches, and overlaps. At galactic scales, those distortions do not stay confined. They blend. The Milky Way and Andromeda are not separated by emptiness. They are connected by a shared gravitational field. That field is not a line. It is a volume, a region where outcomes are constrained long before anything visible occurs. This is why distance stops functioning as a meaningful barrier. Because gravity does not need contact. It needs duration. And duration is the one resource the universe has in excess. Millions of light years sounds vast, but time converts vastness into certainty. Given enough time, even weak influences dominate. This is a fundamental rule of cosmic dynamics. Weak forces acting briefly can be ignored. Weak forces acting forever cannot. Andromeda's pull is weak at the scale of individual stars, but it is persistent. That persistence compounds. Every orbit inside the Milky Way is slightly altered by Andromeda's presence. Not enough to measure locally, not enough to feel, but enough to accumulate. Over millions of years, tiny deviations stop being tiny. They reshape structure. This is why galaxies evolve slowly instead of exploding. Not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening all the time, quietly. When people hear that Andromeda is millions of light years away, they imagine a buffer zone, a safe gap. But gaps only matter when forces dissipate quickly. Gravity does not. It has no range limit. Its influence weakens with distance, but it never disappears. That distinction matters, because never is a long time. At cosmic scales, eventually is indistinguishable from inevitably. This is where the word close becomes misleading. Close does not mean nearby. It means unavoidable. Andromeda is already unavoidable. The system is already locked. We tend to think of the future as open, as something that can branch. At galactic scales, branching is limited. Massive systems have fewer possible outcomes. The heavier they are, the fewer choices they have. Andromeda and the Milky Way are too massive to be flexible. They cannot dodge each other. They cannot correct course. There is no steering, only falling. But falling does not feel like falling at these scales. It feels like drifting. Drifting is deceptive. Drifting looks safe. Drifting looks stable. But drifting under gravity is not neutral. It is slow collapse. The entire local group of galaxies is engaged in this process. They are not scattered randomly. They are arranged by gravity. Andromeda sits at the center of that arrangement. The Milky Way is not approaching a stranger. It is orbiting a dominant mass. That orbit is imperfect, unstable, decaying. This is why the collision is not optional. It is not an accident waiting to happen. It is the natural resolution of a bound system. Scale hides this by stretching time. At human scales, decay is fast. At cosmic scales, decay is invisible. But invisibility does not mean inactivity. It means patience. We are biased toward thinking that if nothing dramatic happens, nothing important is happening. That bias fails here, because the most important changes at cosmic scale happen without drama. They happen through accumulation. One orbit slightly distorted, another slightly altered. Gas clouds stretch. Stars redistribute. Nothing breaks. Nothing alarms. But the structure evolves. This is how galaxies merge, not through impact, through erosion. By the time a collision becomes visually obvious, the outcome has already been decided for billions of years. This is why Andromeda is not a future threat. It is a current condition. The process has already begun. The Milky Way is already inside Andromeda's gravitational domain, not at the core, at the edge. But edges matter. Edges are where interactions start. This again breaks intuition. We think danger begins at contact. In reality, danger begins at binding. Contact is just the final stage. The uncomfortable truth is that nothing we do matters here. No observation changes the outcome. No action alters the process. This is not because we are insignificant. It is because scale erases agency. At galactic scales, agency does not exist, only mass and time. Andromeda has both. The Milky Way has both. That is enough. The rest is detail. We often imagine the future as something we will experience, but some futures are real without being experiential. They will happen whether or not there are witnesses. The Milky Way-Andromeda merger is one of those futures. It is not waiting for us. It does not require our presence. It will unfold on a timeline that ignores human relevance completely. That realization is unsettling because it reframes certainty. Certainty no longer comes from immediacy. It comes from scale. The larger the system, the less room there is for surprise. Chaos exists locally. But at large scales, outcomes converge. This is why cosmic evolution is predictable in broad strokes, not because we know everything, but because massive systems have limited options. Andromeda and the Milky Way have already exhausted theirs. They are bound. That binding is irreversible. Even if something catastrophic happened elsewhere in the universe, it would not matter. Gravity does not need maintenance. It does not need stability. It persists through chaos. This is why the word event is misleading. There will be no single moment where Andromeda suddenly becomes relevant. There is no countdown, no threshold you can point to. The relevance exists now. It has existed for a long time. It will continue long after. What changes is not reality. What changes is perspective. At some point, long after humanity is gone, the sky will look different. Stars will rearrange. Structures will distort. But by then, the collision will feel obvious, inevitable. That inevitability already exists. We are simply too early in the process to feel it. This is the core failure of scale. It hides certainty behind slowness. It disguises inevitability as distance. Andromeda is not approaching like a threat. It is settling like gravity always does, slowly, relentlessly, without concern for observation. This is why thinking in light years misleads us. Light years measure visibility, not influence. Visibility tells you what you can see. Influence tells you what will happen. Andromeda's influence is already here, not as an image, as a condition. To understand why gravity across millions of light years matters, you have to abandon the idea of empty space. Empty space is a convenient fiction. It helps us imagine separation. It helps us imagine isolation. It helps us believe that distance creates independence. But at cosmic scales, space is never neutral. It is shaped. Every massive object bends it. Every bend overlaps with others. By the time you reach the scale of galaxies, space itself is no longer a background. It becomes the medium through which everything happens. Gravity is not a force reaching across emptiness. It is geometry. Mass tells space-time how to curve. Curved space-time tells mass how to move. That relationship does not weaken with intention. It weakens only with distance, and even then, it never vanishes. At the scale of Andromeda and the Milky Way, those curves overlap, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough to remove neutrality. This is where intuition fails again. We imagine gravity as something you either feel or don't. You stand on Earth, you feel weight. You float in space, you don't. But gravity does not disappear when you stop feeling it. It simply becomes subtle. Subtle gravity is not harmless. It is cumulative. A star orbiting at the outskirts of the Milky Way does not move in a perfect circle. Its path is slightly distorted, not because something is wrong, but because multiple gravitational influences are acting at once. One of those influences is Andromeda, not directly, not aggressively, but persistently. That persistence is what matters. When gravity acts over millions of years, even the smallest deviation becomes structural. Paths diverge, distributions change, systems evolve. This is how galaxies grow, stretch, and eventually merge, not through sudden attraction, through gradual loss of independence. The Milky Way is not being pulled like an object on a string. It is being reshaped from the edges inward. This is difficult to visualize because nothing appears to move, but motion is not required. Constraint is. Once a system becomes bound, its future narrows. There are fewer trajectories available. Escape paths disappear. This narrowing is invisible until it is complete. By the time motion becomes obvious, options are already gone. This is why gravity across millions of light years is so powerful, not because it is strong, but because it removes alternatives. The Milky Way cannot choose to drift elsewhere. Its stars cannot vote. The geometry of spacetime around it already limits what is possible. Andromeda's mass is large enough that those limits matter. Not today, not tomorrow, but continuously. This is the part people misunderstand when they hear billions of years. They assume that slowness implies weakness. In reality, slowness implies certainty. Fast processes can be disrupted. Slow processes dominate. Nothing interferes with gravity at this scale. No explosion cancels it. No radiation counters it. No expansion isolates it locally. The expansion of the universe happens everywhere. It does not rescue bound systems. Inside gravitational domains, expansion loses. That means the local group, including Andromeda and the Milky Way, is effectively closed. What happens inside it stays inside it, and gravity dictates outcomes. This is why the merger is not speculative. It is structural. The only uncertainty lies in how it unfolds, not whether it unfolds. Space between galaxies is often described as empty, but emptiness is misleading. It suggests absence. In reality, intergalactic space is full of influence. Dark matter dominates it. Gravitational fields permeate it. Trajectories pass through it. Nothing about it is passive. When two galaxies exist within the same gravitational landscape, they are already interacting. The interaction simply operates below the threshold of notice. This is where human bias interferes. We associate importance with visibility. If we cannot see change, we assume none is happening. But cosmic processes are not designed to be observed. They are designed to resolve. Gravity does not aim for spectacle. It aims for stability. Stability at large scales often means merger. This is why galaxies merge so frequently in the universe. Not because collisions are common, but because binding is. Once bound, separation requires energy. At galactic scales, that energy is rarely available. So systems resolve the only way they can. They merge. This resolution does not care about time frames. Whether it takes 1 billion years or 10 does not matter. From the universe's perspective, both are brief. What matters is that the outcome is locked. Andromeda and the Milky Way crossed that threshold long ago. We are living inside the delay. This is the most unsettling aspect of scale. The delay creates the illusion of safety. It creates the feeling that nothing is happening. But delay is not prevention. It is simply time stretched thin. At some point, long after the present era, the sky will change. Stars will shift. Structures will distort. By then, the merger will feel obvious. But it was never sudden. It was always underway. We just lack the scale to perceive it. This realization reframes how we think about the universe. Events are not always moments. Sometimes they are eras, and eras can begin without announcement. The Andromeda-Milky Way interaction is such an era. It began quietly, without witnesses, without drama, and it continues the same way. This challenges another assumption, the assumption that knowledge requires observation. Some processes are real regardless of whether they are seen. They do not wait for instruments. They do not require confirmation. They simply unfold. Gravity across millions of light years is one of those processes. It does not need to be detected to be effective. It operates regardless. This is why calling Andromeda far away is misleading. Far away implies separation. Separation no longer exists here, only delay. Delay between cause and consequence. Delay between binding and resolution. The Milky Way is already constrained by Andromeda's presence, not dramatically, but fundamentally. Its future options are fewer because Andromeda exists. That is influence. That is proximity at cosmic scale, not closeness of location, closeness of outcome. At some point, the idea of the future stops being useful, not because the future disappears, but because the process has already begun. This is the mistake people make when they hear about Andromeda. They imagine a distant event, neatly placed billions of years ahead, something theoretical, something abstract. But at cosmic scales, beginnings do not announce themselves. They do not start with motion you can point to. They start with constraint. The moment two massive systems become bound, the future collapses into a narrow range of outcomes. That collapse already happened. The Milky Way and Andromeda are no longer independent systems drifting through space. They are a pair, a coupled structure, a shared gravitational fate. From that moment on, the future stopped being open. Only the timeline remained flexible. This is why Andromeda is not a future problem. It is a present condition unfolding slowly. The universe does not distinguish between now and later the way we do. Those categories only matter to observers with short lifespans. At galactic scale, time is continuous. Processes that take billions of years are not postponed. They are simply extended. Nothing about the Andromeda-Milky Way interaction is waiting to begin. Everything that matters is already in motion. Stars at the edges of our galaxy are already responding. Dark matter structures are already overlapping. Orbital dynamics are already constrained. These changes are not dramatic. They are not meant to be. The universe does not operate through sudden shifts at large scales. It operates through gradual alignment. This is deeply unintuitive. We associate danger with speed. We associate relevance with immediacy. But gravity ignores both. It acts whether or not anything appears to be happening. Andromeda does not need to approach faster to matter. It does not need to look closer. It already limits what is possible. This is what scale does. It decouples importance from perception. At human scale, things matter because we notice them. At cosmic scale, things matter because they cannot be avoided. This distinction changes how we should think about proximity. Proximity is not about distance. It is about inevitability. Andromeda is close in the only way that truly matters, not spatially, causally. The Milky Way's future structure already includes Andromeda. There is no version of the future where that influence disappears. The only uncertainty is in the details. Which stars end up where? Which structures survive intact? Which ones are stretched beyond recognition? But uncertainty about detail is not uncertainty about outcome. That outcome is fixed. This is uncomfortable because it undermines agency. There is nothing to prepare, nothing to prevent, nothing to observe that would change anything. The process does not care whether it is understood. It will continue regardless. This is not a failure of science. It is a boundary of relevance. Some truths exist without consequence for decision-making. They simply exist. The Andromeda merger is one of them. It will not affect your life. It will not affect humanity. It may not even affect whatever comes after. But it is real, and it is already happening. That combination is difficult to accept. We are trained to think of the present as active and the future as hypothetical. At cosmic scales, the present is just a slice through a process too slow to feel. What we call now is arbitrary. The universe does not privilege it. From the universe's perspective, the merger is underway. From ours, it feels distant. Both can be true. This reveals something uncomfortable about scale. Scale does not just make things larger. It makes concepts meaningless. Words like soon, later, and far lose precision. They become emotional markers rather than physical ones. Andromeda exposes this. It forces us to confront the fact that some processes are certain long before they are visible. That certainty does not require drama. It does not require confirmation. It exists quietly. This is why Andromeda feels unsettling when you think about it properly, not because of destruction, but because of indifference. The universe does not rush to include us in its timeline. It does not slow down for comprehension. It simply continues. The Milky Way is not special in this. Galaxies merge constantly across the universe, not as accidents, as resolutions. The universe favors fewer, larger structures over time. That is the direction of gravitational evolution. Andromeda and the Milky Way are following that direction. Nothing unusual, nothing exceptional, which makes it worse, because it means this is not a story about rarity. It is a story about inevitability. Scale removes drama. It replaces it with certainty. And certainty is harder to process than danger. Danger implies response. Certainty implies acceptance. There is no response to gravity at this scale, only acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that far away is a psychological comfort, not a physical boundary. Acknowledgement that some futures exist long before they arrive. acknowledgement that we live inside processes we will never see completed. This does not make the universe hostile. It makes it honest. Andromeda is already too close because closeness is not measured in distance. It is measured in consequence. The consequence is already locked in. The rest is time. Time stretched so thin that it feels like nothing. But nothing is not happening. Something has been happening for billions of years, and it will continue for billions more. Whether or not anyone is watching, that is what scale does. It removes us from the center of relevance, and in doing so, it shows us how the universe actually works, not through moments, but through processes, not through events, but through inevitabilities. Andromeda is one of them. If Section 1 dismantled the idea of distance, then Section 2 dismantles something deeper, human intuition itself. Because even when people accept that Andromeda is approaching, they still misunderstand why that feels unsettling. The discomfort does not come from collision. It comes from scale, breaking the rules we rely on to feel oriented in reality. Human intuition depends on proportion. We understand size by comparison. We understand danger by speed. We understand relevance by immediacy. None of those survive contact with cosmic scale. At galactic distances, the universe stops behaving in ways that intuition can track. Andromeda is the clearest example of this failure, because nothing about it looks urgent. Nothing about it feels close, and yet the outcome is fixed. This contradiction exposes a weakness in how humans reason about reality. We are not built to understand processes that unfold across millions of years. Our sense of causality is short. We expect cause and effect to be nearby in time. Touch fire, get burned. Step forward, arrive somewhere. Cosmic causality does not work like that. At galactic scale, cause and effect are separated by epochs. What Andromeda is doing now will not be visible for millions of years. What we see now already happened millions of years ago. This delay creates an illusion of stability. It makes everything feel frozen. But frozen does not mean inactive. It means stretched beyond perception. This is where scale becomes dangerous to intuition. Not because it hides threats, but because it hides certainty. The human brain is extremely good at reacting. It is terrible at accepting inevitability without motion. We rely on motion to signal relevance. We rely on change to justify attention. At cosmic scale, relevance exists without change. This is deeply unsettling. Andromeda is relevant now, not because it is changing quickly, but because it has already constrained the future. Constraint does not announce itself. It only becomes visible once options are gone. This is why scale feels abstract. It removes the emotional markers we used to assign importance. 2 million light years feels like infinity because nothing happens across that span within a lifetime. But infinity is not what matters. Connection is. The Milky Way and Andromeda are connected. That connection exists regardless of how slowly it manifests. This is the part people struggle with. They imagine that if something takes long enough, it might as well not exist. But cosmic scale turns time into a weapon against intuition. The longer something takes, the more certain it becomes. Fast processes can fail. Slow processes dominate. This is the opposite of how humans assess risk. We fear sudden events. We ignore slow ones. The universe does the reverse. It treats slow, massive processes as the most reliable. This is why Andromeda matters, not because of what will happen in a moment, but because nothing will stop what is already happening. Human intuition expects opportunities for intervention. At galactic scale, there are none. This produces a subtle psychological tension. We understand the facts intellectually, but emotionally they feel meaningless, too slow, too distant, too abstract. This emotional dismissal is a defense mechanism. It protects us from having to reconcile certainty without relevance. But the universe does not care about relevance. It does not optimize for experience. It optimizes for resolution. Galaxies do not drift forever. They resolve into larger structures. That resolution is driven by gravity, acting patiently over time. Andromeda is part of that resolution. The Milky Way is part of that resolution. Nothing dramatic needs to happen for this to be true, but this is where scale destroys intuition most completely. It breaks the link between feeling and fact. We feel safe because nothing changes. But safety is not the category that applies. The correct category is inevitability. Inevitability feels neutral. It lacks urgency. It lacks drama, but it is absolute. At human scale, inevitability usually feels threatening. Death, aging, decay. At cosmic scale, inevitability feels invisible. That invisibility does not weaken it. It strengthens it, because nothing interrupts it. The universe is full of processes that humans will never witness, begin, or end. We exist inside the middle of them. The Andromeda merger is one such process. We did not see it begin. We will not see it end. But that does not make it hypothetical. It makes it indifferent to observation. This indifference is what unsettles people when they truly think about scale. Not destruction, not collision, but irrelevance. The universe does not need witnesses. Its most important processes unfold without regard for perception. This forces a reframing of what now means. Now is not a special moment. It is just a slice through something larger. When we say Andromeda will collide with the Milky Way, we are projecting human temporality onto a non-human process. From the universe's perspective, the interaction is already underway. From ours, it feels distant. Both perspectives are correct, but intuition favors the second. This bias blinds us to how scale actually works. Scale compresses agency. The larger the system, the less room there is for choice. The Milky Way cannot decide to avoid Andromeda. Stars cannot change course. Dark matter cannot rearrange itself to escape. Once scale crosses a threshold, behavior becomes deterministic, not chaotic, deterministic. This is deeply counterintuitive. We associate large systems with unpredictability, but gravity does the opposite. It simplifies outcomes. It removes options. At galactic scale, freedom disappears. Only paths remain. Andromeda and the Milky Way are already on one of those paths. The fact that it takes billions of years does not make it uncertain. It makes it complete. Completion stretched over time is still completion. This is the error human intuition makes. It equates slowness with weakness. At cosmic scale, slowness is strength. It means nothing interferes. This is why scale does not just make things big. It changes what concepts apply. Danger becomes meaningless. Urgency disappears. Only inevitability remains. Andromeda is not dangerous. It is inevitable. That distinction matters because danger invites response. Inevitability demands acceptance. The universe does not offer alternatives at this scale. It offers outcomes. Andromeda is one of them. Once scale crosses a certain threshold, human-centered thinking collapses. Not gradually, completely. At that point, concepts that once felt solid lose meaning. Near, far, soon, late. They stop describing reality and start describing emotion. This is where Andromeda becomes more than a galaxy. It becomes a reference point for how limited intuition really is. We instinctively center ourselves in every explanation. We measure distance by how long it would take us to travel. We measure time by how long something would take to matter to us. We measure importance by whether we will be around to see consequences. None of those metrics apply at cosmic scale. The universe does not privilege observers. It does not optimize for relevance. It does not adjust processes to match attention spans. Scale removes the observer from the equation. This removal is uncomfortable because it strips away agency. If something matters but does not involve us, our instincts struggle to place it. We default to dismissal. Too far, too slow, too big. These phrases sound scientific, but they are emotional filters. They allow us to move on. Andromeda bypasses those filters because it sits right at the boundary, close enough to be connected, slow enough to feel irrelevant. This combination is uniquely unsettling. It exposes a flaw in how humans assign importance. We assume relevance scales with immediacy, but at cosmic scale, Relevance scales with inevitability. The more inevitable something is, the less dramatic it appears. Gravity does not shock, it commits. Once committed, nothing reverses it. This is why the Milky Way-Andromeda interaction feels abstract. Not because it lacks certainty, but because certainty has no emotional signal at this scale. Human intuition expects warning signs, acceleration, escalation, noise. The universe offers none. It proceeds silently. Andromeda is already shaping outcomes without any visible sign. This forces the reconsideration of what happening even means. Is something happening only when it changes rapidly? Or is something happening the moment its outcome becomes unavoidable? At cosmic scale, the second definition applies. The event is not the collision. The event is the binding. The collision is just the visible resolution. This reframing is difficult because it removes spectacle. It replaces it with structure. Structure is harder to feel, but it is more fundamental. The Milky Way is not on a path because it is moving quickly. It is on a path because alternatives are gone. That is what gravity across millions of light years does. It removes degrees of freedom. Once removed, they do not return. This is why distance stops functioning as a protective concept. Distance only matters if it allows escape. Here, it does not. Andromeda is already within the same gravitational solution. There is no route out. This is not unique. It is how most large-scale structures in the universe behave. Clusters form, groups merge, mass concentrates. Over time, the universe becomes less fragmented, not because things move faster, but because gravity keeps working. Human intuition struggles with this because it prefers beginnings and endings. Stories, but cosmic processes are not stories. They are equations unfolding. They do not have chapters. They have trajectories. Once a trajectory is established, nothing interrupts it. This is where scale becomes ruthless. It does not allow hope. It does not allow intervention. It does not allow surprise. At large enough scale, everything simplifies. That simplicity is not comforting. It is indifferent. This indifference is what people sense when they say Andromeda feels unsettling. Not fear, not danger, but insignificance. The universe does not require us to validate its processes. They exist regardless. Andromeda would merge with the Milky Way even if life never existed, even if observation were impossible, even if intelligence never arose. This is the deepest consequence of scale. Reality does not depend on awareness. Awareness is optional. That realization destabilizes intuition. We like to believe that understanding grants control. At cosmic scale, understanding grants perspective, nothing more. Perspective does not change outcomes. It only changes interpretation. Andromeda forces that distinction. Knowing the merger is inevitable does not alter it. It only reframes our place within it. We are not participants. We are witnesses passing through the middle. This reframing also challenges how science is often communicated. Science is usually framed as predictive power. If we can predict something, we assume we can influence it. At galactic scale, prediction exists without influence. We can predict the merger with confidence. That confidence does not create leverage. This separation is rare at human scale. It is normal at cosmic scale. Scale removes the link between knowledge and agency. This is why thinking in terms of threats or problems becomes meaningless. Andromeda is not a problem to be solved. It is a condition to be acknowledged. The universe is full of such conditions. They do not ask for response. They simply persist. Human intuition resists this because it evolved to solve problems. It looks for actions. When no action is possible, intuition disengages. It labels the situation abstract. But abstraction is not irrelevance. It is limitation. Andromeda marks the limit of where human-centered thinking applies. Beyond that, only physics remains. Physics does not care how things feel. It cares how they resolve. The Milky Way Andromeda system will resolve into something else. Not because of drama, but because gravity never stops. This resolution will not be sudden. It will not feel like a moment. It will feel like continuity. That continuity is already happening. The present is not a pause. It is a frame within motion too slow to notice. Once this is understood, the discomfort changes shape. It is no longer fear of collision. It is awareness of scale. Scale reveals how many processes we live inside without ever noticing, not because they are hidden, but because they operate outside the bandwidth of intuition. Andromeda is simply the most accessible example, close enough to matter, slow enough to ignore. This combination exposes a fundamental mismatch. The universe operates on timescales that make human concepts optional. Not wrong, optional. Distance becomes delay. Time becomes background. Importance becomes inevitability. This is the mental shift scale demands. Andromeda forces it, not loudly, not urgently, but persistently. At human scale, the future feels open, not because it truly is, but because enough uncertainty exists to preserve the illusion of choice. At cosmic scale, that illusion collapses. The future does not branch endlessly, it converges. This is one of the hardest ideas to accept because it contradicts how we experience time. We live inside moments where small decisions matter. We see outcomes change. We see paths diverge. But that flexibility does not scale upward. As systems grow larger, options disappear, not gradually, decisively. The larger the mass involved, the fewer futures remain possible. Andromeda demonstrates this perfectly. There is no version of the future where it simply drifts away. There is no hidden path where gravity loosens its hold. There is no scenario where time somehow erases commitment. Once binding occurs, the future narrows into a corridor, wide at first, then tighter, then singular. This does not require speed. It requires duration. At cosmic scale, time does not create opportunity. It removes it. This reframes the future completely. The future is no longer a place where uncertainty accumulates. It is a place where uncertainty dissolves. That dissolution is invisible when it happens slowly, but it is absolute. This is why talking about the Andromeda merger as something that will happen misses the point. What matters is not the moment of collision. What matters is the loss of alternatives. That loss already occurred. The future did not suddenly become fixed. It gradually stopped being flexible. This creates a paradox. From our perspective, the merger feels distant and hypothetical. From a physical perspective, it is already decided. Both views are true. They simply operate at different scales. Human intuition is built to navigate the first. Physics governs the second. Scale exposes the mismatch. When people imagine the future, they imagine a blank space waiting to be filled. At cosmic scale, the future is more like a channel, wide in the past, narrowing with time. Andromeda and the Milky Way entered that channel long ago. Nothing about the present changes that. This challenges another assumption. The assumption that knowing something early gives you leverage. At cosmic scale, early knowledge does not create options. It only creates awareness. Awareness without agency is uncomfortable. It feels incomplete. But it is honest. The universe does not distribute agency evenly. At small scales, agency exists. At large scales, structure dominates. This is why cosmic evolution looks predictable in broad terms. Galaxies merge, clusters form, matter concentrates, not because of randomness, but because gravity removes possibilities faster than chaos can introduce them. The future, at this scale, is not a field of chance. It is a gradient. Andromeda sits on that gradient. The Milky Way slides along it. This movement is not dramatic. It does not feel like motion, but it is real. This forces a reconsideration of what now even means. If the future is already constrained, then the present is not a decision point. It is a passage. We often think of the present as a moment of control. At cosmic scale, it is a moment of alignment. The system is already aligned toward its resolution. Nothing in the present redirects it. This does not make the present meaningless. It makes it contextual. Our lives unfold. Inside processes we do not influence. That does not diminish them. It clarifies their scale. The Andromeda merger is not relevant to us because we can change it. It is relevant because it reveals how scale reshapes reality. It shows that some futures exist independently of experience. They will arrive whether or not they are observed. This is unsettling because it removes narrative comfort. Stories require suspense. Cosmic processes do not. They unfold without regard for anticipation. The future, at this scale, is not suspenseful. It is resolved long before it arrives. This does not mean every detail is known. Details remain chaotic. Which stars end up where? Which structures survive intact? But the category of outcome is fixed. This distinction matters. Chaos at the micro level does not contradict certainty at the macro level. Both coexist. Human intuition struggles with that. We assume chaos implies unpredictability everywhere. At cosmic scale, chaos is constrained. It cannot escape the boundaries set by mass and gravity. This is why large-scale structure in the universe looks ordered, not because it is designed, but because options have been removed. Andromeda is not special in this. It is simply close enough for us to notice the effect, close enough to feel personal. That feeling is misleading. The process does not care about proximity to observers. It only cares about mass distribution. The future of the Milky Way is being written by gravity, not by time. Time is just the medium through which gravity resolves things. This reframing is subtle but important. We often treat time as the active element, as if waiting long enough changes outcomes. At cosmic scale, waiting reveals outcomes. It does not create them. Andromeda's merger with the Milky Way is not something time will cause. It is something time will expose. That exposure is inevitable. This shifts the role of observation. Observation does not influence the future here. It only intersects it briefly. We are not watching something develop. We are passing through a process already in progress. This realization destabilizes the idea that the future is something ahead of us. At cosmic scale, the future already exists as a constraint. The present is just the portion we inhabit. This is why talking about Andromeda in terms of threat or catastrophe misses the point. Threat implies urgency. Catastrophe implies disruption. The merger is neither. It is resolution. Slow, indifferent, unavoidable. Scale strips away emotion. It leaves structure. And structure does not rush. It simply continues. This is the final failure of intuition. We want the future to be something that reacts to us. At cosmic scale, the future ignores us. Not maliciously, not intentionally, simply because we are not part of the equation. The Andromeda merger will not happen to us. It will happen with or without us. That distinction matters because it reveals a universe where importance is not tied to experience, where futures can exist long before they are lived, where processes can be underway without witnesses. This is what scale teaches, not insignificance, perspective, the realization that some futures are already written, not because of destiny, but because physics has already removed the alternatives. Once scale rewrites the future, it also rewrites relevance, not by removing meaning, but by relocating it. At human scale, relevance is tied to outcome. What happens next matters most. At cosmic scale, relevance is tied to structure. What is already constrained matters more than what is still flexible. This inversion is difficult to accept because it removes urgency from importance. We are conditioned to believe that what matters must demand attention now. Scale rejects that assumption. Andromeda matters without urgency. It matters without escalation. It matters without spectacle. That kind of relevance feels hollow at first, but it is more stable than urgency. Urgency fades. Structure persists. This is why cosmic processes do not behave like stories. Stories rely on tension. They escalate. They resolve. Cosmic processes do not escalate. They unfold. The Andromeda-Milky Way interaction is not building toward a climax. It is already inside its resolution. The collision we imagine is not the point. It is simply the most visible phase of something that has been happening for billions of years. This reframes the idea of later. Later is not when something becomes real. Later is when it becomes visible. Reality does not wait for visibility. This is one of the most uncomfortable lessons scale teaches. We mistake invisibility for absence. We mistake slowness for weakness. We mistake distance for independence. Andromeda exposes all three errors at once. It is invisible to casual observation. It is slow beyond human patience. It is distant beyond intuition. And yet, it is already decisive. This forces a recalibration of what it means for something to be happening. At cosmic scale, happening does not mean changing rapidly. It means being locked into a path. That lock does not announce itself. It simply removes alternatives quietly. Once removed, they do not return. The universe does not reopen options. It closes them. This closure is not dramatic. It is structural. This is why understanding scale can feel disorienting. It strips away the illusion that time alone creates possibility. Time does not create possibility at large scales. It erodes it. The longer gravity acts, the fewer futures remain. This is the opposite of human experience. For us, time usually creates uncertainty. For galaxies, time resolves it. The Milky Way is not waiting to see what happens with Andromeda. It already knows, not consciously, but physically. Its future configuration is constrained. Nothing in the present will change that. This does not make the present meaningless. It gives it context. We live inside a thin slice of a much larger process. That process does not care whether it is noticed. It does not accelerate for witnesses. It does not slow down for comprehension. It continues. Scale teaches that relevance is not about participation. It is about inclusion. The Milky Way is included in Andromeda's future. That inclusion is not optional. This is what already too close truly means. Not that danger is near, but that separation is gone. Once separation is gone, distance becomes cosmetic. It measures delay, not independence. This is the hardest idea to internalize, because independence is central to how humans understand reality. We assume things remain separate unless forced together. Gravity does the opposite. It assumes connection unless energy is applied to prevent it. At galactic scale, there's no energy available to prevent what has begun. The system has already settled into its path. This is not tragic. It is ordinary. Galaxies merge constantly across the universe, not as accidents, as outcomes. Andromeda isn't exceptional. It is simply close enough to remind us how scale works. The reminder is unsettling because it removes comfort. Comfort comes from believing that the future is negotiable. At cosmic scale, it often is not. This does not eliminate wonder. It deepens it. Wonder does not come from danger here. It comes from inevitability unfolding quietly, from processes that outlast civilizations, from outcomes that ignore observation. Scale reveals a universe that does not center experience. It centers mass. It centers structure. It centers time spans that make human history invisible. This does not diminish us. It contextualizes us. We are not the audience for cosmic processes. We are incidental. This is not pessimism. It is accuracy. Accuracy without drama. Andromeda does not threaten Earth. It does not menace the sky. It does not loom in any way we can perceive. And yet, it already defines the long-term structure of our galaxy. That contradiction is what scale feels like. Something can be decisive without being dramatic. Something can be inevitable without being urgent. Something can be close without being near. Once this is understood, Andromeda stops being a story about collision. It becomes a lesson about scale, about how the universe operates without reference to us, about how processes can be real long before they are visible, about how far away is a human phrase, not a physical defense. Andromeda is already too close because closeness is not measured in distance. It is measured in consequence. The consequence is already locked in. The rest is just time unfolding. Time so long that it feels like nothing is happening, but nothing is not happening. Everything that matters already is. Up to this point, Gravity has sounded simple. Too simple. A quiet pull acting across distance. A patient force shaping outcomes slowly. But that description hides the real complexity. Because at galactic scale, gravity is no longer just about stars. Stars are only the visible layer. What actually controls the motion of galaxies is something you cannot see, something that does not shine, does not emit light, does not reveal itself directly, and yet it dominates everything. Most of Andromeda's mass is invisible. Most of the Milky Way's mass is invisible. The interaction that makes the merger inevitable is driven primarily by matter we cannot observe directly. This is where the story becomes more unsettling, because it means that what binds these galaxies together is not what we see when we look up at the sky. It is what we infer. Galaxies are not held together by their stars alone. If they were, they would not survive. The visible matter is not enough. Something else provides the gravitational backbone, a vast diffuse structure extending far beyond the bright edges of each galaxy, a structure that overlaps long before stars ever come close. This invisible structure is what really makes too close meaningful. Long before Andromeda's stars approach the Milky Way's stars, their unseen mass distributions already intersect. The merger does not begin with light. It begins in darkness. This changes the mental image completely. We tend to imagine galaxies as luminous islands floating in space, but that is a misleading picture. They are embedded in massive, overlapping envelopes of gravitational influence. These envelopes do not stop where the light stops. They extend far beyond. When Andromeda and the Milky Way became bound, it was not because their visible disks were near. It was because their invisible structures were already interacting. This is why the process feels abstract. The most important interaction happens where nothing can be seen. Human intuition relies heavily on vision. We trust what we can see. At cosmic scale, what matters most is often invisible. This creates a gap between perception and reality, a gap that gravity fills quietly. The large-scale structure of the universe is shaped almost entirely by this unseen mass. Galaxies trace it like condensation on invisible scaffolding. They move along paths defined not by what they are, but by what surrounds them. Andromeda is not simply moving toward the Milky Way through empty space. Both are moving within a shared gravitational landscape defined by this hidden structure. This landscape already connects them. This is why the merger is not a surprise. It is the natural resolution of overlapping structures. Once those structures intersect, separation becomes impossible, not because of force, but because of geometry. This is the part that intuition resists most. We imagine gravity as something that reaches out. In reality, gravity defines the shape of the space everything moves through. Once that shape overlaps, paths converge. There is no sudden pull. There is no moment of capture. There is only gradual alignment. This alignment has been happening for a very long time. Long before humans existed. Long before Earth formed. Long before the Milky Way had its current shape. The future of our galaxy has been constrained by invisible structure for billions of years. That fact alone should change how future feels. The future is not something waiting to be decided. At large scales, it is something already shaped. We just occupy one thin slice of it. This is where the idea of already underway becomes precise. The merger is not waiting on stars to collide. Stars are almost irrelevant to the beginning of the process. They are passengers. The real interaction happens in the dark. This reframes the idea of closeness yet again. Closeness is not about proximity of light. It is about overlap of influence. And that overlap already exists. We are inside it. Even now, the Milky Way is not moving freely. Its motion is constrained by a structure larger than itself. Andromeda is part of that structure, not as an object approaching, but as a mass shaping the terrain. This is difficult to internalize because it removes agency entirely. There is no moment where something goes wrong, no threshold where danger suddenly appears. The system simply evolves toward resolution. This is how large-scale structure in the universe forms. not through accidents, through inevitabilities. Gravity plus time produces fewer, larger systems. That is the direction of cosmic evolution. Andromeda and the Milky Way are following that direction. Nothing exceptional, nothing dramatic, just scale doing what scale does. This is why the merger will not feel like a collision. It will feel like rearrangement. Stars will pass by each other harmlessly. Distances will stretch and compress. The visible chaos will be gentle, but the structural change will be total. This again breaks intuition. We associate destruction with violence. At galactic scale, destruction is quiet. Order dissolves slowly. Structure reorganizes. The galaxy we call home will not be destroyed. It will be transformed. That transformation is already constrained by forces we cannot see. This is what makes Andromeda unsettling in a deeper way, not because it threatens, but because it reveals how much of reality operates outside perception. We live inside gravitational structures that predate us. We will exit before they resolve, and yet they define the largest scale outcomes we are part of. Understanding this requires letting go of a comforting belief, the belief that what matters must be visible. At cosmic scale, visibility is optional. Influence is not. If invisible structure governs motion, then order in the universe is not accidental. It is emergent, not imposed from above, not designed, but produced by gravity acting patiently over time. From a distance, the universe looks organized. Galaxies line up along filaments. Clusters form nodes. Voids open between them. This pattern is not decorative. It is the physical consequence of unseen mass-shaping space itself. What looks like arrangement is actually constraint. Matter flows where gravity allows it to flow. At small scales, this order is impossible to see. Everything looks chaotic. Stars orbit unpredictably. Gas clouds collide and disperse. Local events feel random. But zoom out far enough and randomness dissolves. Large-scale structure becomes clear. This is another place where intuition fails. We assume that complexity increases with size. At cosmic scale, the opposite happens. The larger the system, the simpler its behavior becomes. Not because it loses detail, but because constraints dominate. Gravity smooths outcomes. It removes freedom. At the scale of galaxies, chaos still exists, but only inside boundaries already defined. Those boundaries come from invisible structure. This is why Andromeda and the Milky Way are not moving randomly. They are following gradients in a gravitational landscape shaped long before either galaxy formed. Their paths are not choices, they are consequences. Once that landscape exists, motion becomes predictable, not in detail, but in direction. Direction is all gravity needs. This is why the merger is inevitable, not because we can predict every interaction, but because the large-scale constraints allow only one resolution. The details will be messy. Stars will scatter, orbits will change, structures will stretch, but the end state is constrained. Two bound systems do not remain separate forever. They resolve. This resolution does not require violence. It requires patience. This again challenges how we think about order. We associate order with control, but cosmic order emerges without intention. It arises because gravity eliminates alternatives. Over time, matter settles into fewer configurations. The universe does not explore all possibilities equally. It favors stability. And stability at large scales means merger. Andromeda is part of that tendency, not as an anomaly, as an example. This perspective also reframes the role of chaos. Chaos exists locally. It determines which star goes where, which structures survive. But chaos does not override large-scale constraints. It operates inside them. This is why predictions about galactic evolution can be confident without being precise. We know what will happen broadly. We cannot know exactly how it will look. That distinction matters. Confidence without precision feels strange. We are used to the opposite. At human scale, precision often comes before confidence. At cosmic scale, confidence comes from structure. Structure eliminates uncertainty at the macro level. The micro level remains unpredictable. This is why the universe can look both chaotic and orderly at the same time. Andromeda embodies this duality. From our perspective, it is a collection of stars in motion. From a larger perspective, it is a mass following a gravitational gradient. Both descriptions are true. Only one determines the future. The merger is not driven by individual stars. It is driven by the shape of space itself. That shape already exists. This is the deeper reason why too close matters. Not because of proximity, but because once structure overlaps, motion becomes constrained. The Milky Way is no longer free to wander. It is embedded in a gravitational basin shared with Andromeda. Basins do not let things escape easily. They guide motion inward, slowly, inevitably. This basin extends far beyond what we see. Its edges are not sharp. They fade gradually, but they are real. Once inside, exit requires energy. At galactic scale, that energy does not exist. So motion resolves inward. This is how clusters grow. This is how galaxies merge. This is how large-scale order emerges. Not by design, by elimination. Possibilities are removed until only one remains. This is uncomfortable because it implies that freedom decreases with scale. The larger the system, the fewer options it has. Human intuition prefers the opposite. We imagine that larger systems are more flexible, but gravity enforces the reverse. Flexibility exists at small scales. At large scales, outcomes harden. Andromeda is already inside a hardened outcome. The Milky Way is too. This does not mean the future is boring. It means it is constrained. Constrained futures are not empty. They are just predictable in shape. The universe is full of such futures. We happen to live inside one. Understanding this changes how we interpret cosmic images. What looks static is not stable. What looks distant is not separate. What looks quiet is not inactive. The universe is constantly resolving itself. Andromeda is a visible marker of that resolution, not because it is special, but because it is close enough to remind us. The hidden architecture of the universe does not announce itself. It reveals itself through outcomes. Galaxies align, clusters form, voids open. Andromeda's path is one of those outcomes. It was determined long before light from its stars reached our eyes. This realization reframes observation itself. We are not watching events unfold. We are seeing snapshots of processes already shaped. Each image is a slice through inevitability. The future is not waiting to be observed. It is already embedded in structure. That is, the quiet truth scale reveals. Understanding structure does not grant control. This is one of the hardest truths to accept about the universe. At human scale, knowledge and power are tightly linked. If you understand how something works, you can usually influence it, predict it, modify it, avoid it. At cosmic scale, that link breaks. Understanding becomes observational, not operational. You can know exactly what will happen and still be completely unable to affect it. The Andromeda merger is a perfect example. We can model it, we can simulate it, we can predict its broad outcome with high confidence. None of that gives us leverage. Nothing about understanding gravity across millions of light years creates an option to intervene. This is not a failure of technology. It is a consequence of scale. Scale compresses agency. As systems grow larger, individual actions lose relevance. Eventually, agency disappears entirely. What remains are trajectories. This is deeply counterintuitive. We often assume that if we could somehow scale ourselves up, become more powerful, more advanced, more capable, we could eventually influence anything. Cosmic scale rejects that assumption. There is a threshold beyond which power stops accumulating. Beyond that point, mass and time dominate. No amount of intelligence changes the shape of space-time. No strategy alters gravitational basins once they form. This is why cosmic prediction feels hollow to human intuition. We are used to prediction as a tool. At galactic scale, prediction is a description. It tells us what will happen, not what can be changed. This distinction matters. The Andromeda Milky Way interaction is not something we can steer. It is something we can only describe. The universe is full of such processes. They exist independently of agency. They are not problems to be solved. They are conditions to be acknowledged. This forces a shift in how we think about understanding itself. Understanding is no longer about mastery. It becomes about alignment with reality, knowing where control ends, knowing where inevitability begins. This boundary is uncomfortable because it undermines a deeply held belief, the belief that intelligence eventually grants dominance. At cosmic scale, intelligence grants perspective, nothing more. Perspective does not change outcomes. It only changes interpretation. This is why cosmic science often feels humbling, not because it reveals danger, but because it reveals limits. The Andromeda merger will occur regardless of who understands it. Understanding does not accelerate it. It does not delay it. It does not reshape it. The process is indifferent to comprehension. This indifference is not hostility. It is scale. Scale erases negotiation. At small scales, forces compete. At large scales, gravity wins by default. There is nothing else strong enough, persistent enough, or widespread enough to counter it. This is why large-scale structure in the universe looks inevitable rather than accidental. Clusters form not because conditions are special, but because gravity always produces the same broad outcome given it enough time. This predictability is often mistaken for simplicity. It is not simple. It is constrained. Constraint is what makes outcomes reliable. The Andromeda merger is reliable, not because it is violent, but because it is structurally enforced. Once mass distributions overlap, motion resolves inward. This resolution does not depend on choice. It depends on geometry. Geometry does not negotiate. Understanding this changes how control is perceived. At cosmic scale, control is an illusion. There is no steering wheel. There is no intervention point. There is only motion unfolding within boundaries already set. This realization can feel unsettling, but it is also clarifying. It removes the pressure to imagine solutions where none exist. It reframes cosmic events not as threats, but as context. Andromeda is not a danger. It is a condition that defines the long-term structure of our galaxy. This is not something to fear. It is something to recognize. Fear implies urgency. Urgency implies action. Action is meaningless here. Recognition is the only appropriate response. Recognition of scale. Recognition of limits. Recognition that some processes are too large to be influenced, no matter how advanced an observer becomes. This does not diminish human achievement. It places it correctly. Our influence exists at the scales we inhabit. It does not scale indefinitely. This is the quiet lesson cosmic structure teaches. Power does not grow linearly with understanding. It plateaus, and then it ends. Beyond that point, only observation remains. The Andromeda merger exists beyond that point. We can simulate it beautifully. We can visualize it in detail. We can tell compelling stories about it. None of those stories affect the outcome. They affect only how we relate to it. This is why cosmic understanding often feels philosophical, not because the universe is abstract, but because the role of the observer is limited. When agency disappears, interpretation becomes the only activity left. Interpretation does not change reality. It changes perspective. Perspective matters. It determines how we place ourselves within processes we cannot influence. Andromeda forces that placement. It reminds us that some futures exist independently of action. They are not avoidable. They are not negotiable. They are simply unfolding. This challenges a deeply ingrained instinct, the instinct to ask, what should be done? At cosmic scale, the honest answer is often nothing. Not because nothing matters, but because nothing can be changed. This is not pessimism. It is realism. Realism at a scale where agency vanishes. The universe does not offer control everywhere. It offers understanding. Understanding without control is uncomfortable, but it is truthful. Andromeda is already too close because closeness here is not something that can be reversed. Understanding that does not create fear. It creates clarity. Clarity about what scale does to agency. Clarity about where human relevance ends. Clarity about how the universe operates, regardless of observers. Prediction at cosmic scale is a strange thing. It offers certainty without leverage. At human scale, prediction is valuable because it enables response. You predict weather to prepare. You predict motion to avoid collision. You predict outcomes to choose differently. At galactic scale, prediction loses that function. It does not empower action. It only reveals structure. Knowing that Andromeda will merge with the Milky Way does not create a decision point. There is nothing to choose. The future does not branch here. It resolves. This forces a reevaluation of what prediction actually means. Prediction is not always about control. Sometimes it is about orientation, understanding where you are inside a process, understanding whether something is contingent or inevitable. The Andromeda merger is inevitable. That knowledge does not change it, but it changes how we frame it. It moves the event out of the category of threat and into the category of structure. Threats demand response. Structures demand understanding. This distinction is subtle but critical. Most fear comes from imagining an event as something that could be avoided. Once avoidance is impossible, fear loses its function. What remains is clarity. Clarity about limits. Clarity about scale. Clarity about the role of observation. At cosmic scale, observation does not intervene. It witnesses. This makes prediction feel detached. But that detachment is honest. The universe does not distribute influence evenly. Some processes are accessible, some are not. The Andromeda merger exists beyond the range of influence. Understanding that boundary is as important as understanding the process itself. This is where prediction becomes philosophical, not because the science is vague, but because its implications reach beyond action. It forces us to confront a reality where knowing does not imply doing. This is rare at human scale. At cosmic scale, it is normal. Prediction becomes a map, not a tool. It shows where things are going. It does not allow rerouting. This reframes the value of knowledge. Knowledge is no longer instrumental. It is contextual. It tells us how the universe behaves when agency disappears. That insight matters, not because it changes outcomes, but because it reshapes perspective. Perspective influences how we interpret our place in reality. The Andromeda merger tells us something uncomfortable but important. Some futures exist regardless of intention. They are not threats. They are not promises. They are consequences of structure. This understanding strips away anthropocentric thinking. The universe is not arranged around observers. Observers exist inside it briefly. They do not direct it. This does not make observation meaningless. It makes it rare. We are present for a tiny segment of an enormous process. That presence does not grant authority. It grants insight. Insight into how scale operates. Insight into how inevitability forms. Insight into how little drama is required for certainty. This reframes cosmic time. The future is not always something that unfolds suddenly. Sometimes it unfolds so slowly that it feels static. But static does not mean unchanged. It means movement below the threshold of perception. The Andromeda merger exists below that threshold. It is not waiting to begin. It is already unfolding. Prediction simply reveals that fact. It does not create it. This realization also reshapes how we think about significance. Significance is not always tied to immediacy. The most significant processes in the universe often occur too slowly to notice. They shape everything else. Andromeda shapes the long-term fate of the Milky Way. That significance does not require urgency. It does not require attention. It exists regardless. Understanding that helps dissolve a common misconception. The misconception that the universe must feel dramatic to be meaningful. It does not. Meaning can exist without sensation. Importance can exist without urgency. Inevitability can exist without fear. Andromeda demonstrates all three. It is meaningful because it reveals scale. It is important because it defines structure. It is inevitable because gravity does not negotiate. Prediction at this scale does not invite action. It invites acceptance. Acceptance not as resignation, but as accurate placement within reality. Knowing where control ends is not defeat. It is orientation. Orientation allows understanding without illusion. This is the final consequence of scale. It removes the expectation that everything important must involve us. It shows that the universe has its own priorities: mass, structure, time. Human presence is incidental, not insignificant, incidental. We matter at the scales we inhabit. We do not matter at scales that ignore agency entirely. The Andromeda merger exists at such a scale. Prediction reveals it. Understanding acknowledges it. Nothing more is required. This is not a loss. It is clarity. Clarity about how the universe behaves when freed from human categories. No urgency, no drama, no negotiation. Only structure resolving over time. Andromeda is already too close, because closeness here is not about distance. It is about certainty. The certainty is already in place. The rest is just the universe doing what it always does, resolving itself, quietly, inevitably. Perspective is the final thing scale takes from us. Not knowledge, not curiosity. Perspective. Because perspective depends on proportion. It depends on the ability to place yourself meaningfully within what you observe. At human scale, that placement is easy. You stand somewhere. Things happen around you. Causes lead to effects within a time frame you can feel. At cosmic scale, that framework collapses. You are no longer in the process in any meaningful way. You are passing through it. The Andromeda merger makes this unavoidable. It forces a confrontation with a reality where relevance is not tied to experience. The future of the Milky Way is being shaped by Andromeda right now, not in a way that affects daily life, not in a way that demands response, but in a way that is absolute. This creates a strange tension. Something can be true, decisive, and unavoidable, and still feel completely disconnected from lived experience. That disconnect is not accidental. It is produced by scale. Scale stretches cause and effect so far apart that meaning detaches from sensation. You cannot feel inevitability when it unfolds across billions of years. You can only understand it abstractly. This is where many people disengage. They confuse emotional distance with irrelevance. But irrelevance is not the right word. The correct word is misalignment. Human experience is misaligned with cosmic processes, not because we are incapable of understanding them, but because we cannot inhabit their timescales. We experience moments. Galaxies experience eras. That difference matters. The Andromeda merger does not threaten us. It does not demand preparation. It does not call for urgency. And yet, it reveals something fundamental about reality. That some of the most important processes in the universe will never intersect human experience directly. They exist anyway. This challenges a deep assumption. The assumption that meaning requires participation. At cosmic scale, meaning exists independently of observers, not emotional meaning, structural meaning, the kind of meaning that determines what exists later. The Milky Way will not look the way it does now forever. That fact is meaningful, not because anyone will see the change, but because structure will change. Perspective struggles with this. We are wired to center ourselves, not out of arrogance, but necessity. Evolution rewards organisms that prioritize local relevance. The universe does not reward that bias. It ignores it. Scale exposes this mismatch brutally. Andromeda is close enough to matter, but far enough to feel abstract. That combination destabilizes intuition. It asks us to accept that something can define the future without ever becoming present. This is not how we are trained to think. We imagine the future as something we move toward. At cosmic scale, the future moves through us. We occupy a temporary cross-section of processes too large to notice. This reframes what now even means. Now is not a privileged moment. It is not a turning point. It is simply where observation happens to intersect inevitability. The Andromeda merger was inevitable long before now. It will remain inevitable long after now. Our presence inside that window does not change it. This realization can feel diminishing, but it does not have to be. It replaces a false sense of importance with an accurate sense of placement. We are not central. We are contextual. That distinction matters. Centrality implies control. Context implies understanding. Understanding without control is uncomfortable, but honest. The universe does not ask us to steer it. It allows us to see it briefly. That seeing has value, not because it changes outcomes, but because it aligns perception with reality. The Andromeda merger teaches that alignment. It shows that closeness is not measured in meters. It is measured in consequence. And consequences do not require immediacy. They require inevitability. This reframes fear. Fear relies on anticipation. Anticipation relies on uncertainty. Where outcomes are fixed, fear loses traction. What remains is acceptance. Acceptance not as resignation, but as clarity. Clarity about scale. Clarity about limits. Clarity about the difference between relevance and importance. The merger matters. It is important. It is not relevant to us. Those are not contradictions. They are categories. Human culture often confuses them. We prioritize relevance because it affects us. The universe prioritizes importance because it persists. Scale reveals that distinction. Andromeda is important because it shapes the long-term structure of our galaxy. It is irrelevant because we will never experience the change. Both statements can coexist. This coexistence challenges narrative thinking. Stories require protagonists. Cosmic processes do not. They unfold regardless of who is watching. This does not make them meaningless. It makes them impersonal. Impersonality is often mistaken for emptiness. It is not empty. It is indifferent. Indifference is difficult to process emotionally, but it is fundamental to understanding scale. The universe is not hostile. It is not benevolent. It is uninterested. Scale strips away the illusion that interest is required for consequence. Gravity does not care. Time does not care. Structure does not care. They operate anyway. Andromeda is not coming for the Milky Way. It is interacting with it because physics allows no alternative. Intent does not exist at this scale. Only resolution. This forces a reframing of significance. Significance is no longer about impact on observers. It is about persistence across time. What lasts longer matters more structurally. Galaxies last longer than civilizations. Their interactions matter more at cosmic scale. This does not devalue human experience. It contextualizes it. We matter locally. We do not matter universally. That is not an insult. It is proportion. Scale restores proportion. It shows where human categories apply and where they stop. Andromeda exists beyond that boundary. It teaches without addressing us directly. It reveals how reality behaves when experience is removed from the equation. This is the final lesson of scale. Not that we are small, but that the universe is structured in ways that do not require us. That understanding is uncomfortable because it removes narrative comfort, but it also removes illusion. Illusion that the future waits for us. Illusion that relevance defines importance. Illusion that observation grants centrality. None of those survive scale. What survives is structure. Gravity shaping outcomes. Time resolving them. Andromeda shaping the future of the Milky Way quietly, patiently, inevitably. This does not demand awe. It invites accuracy. Accuracy about where we stand. Accuracy about what matters. Accuracy about how little far away actually protects. Andromeda is already too close. Not because it threatens us, but because it reminds us that some processes do not care whether we are ready to understand them. They simply continue. And we happen to be here long enough to notice a fragment. That is not insignificance. That is perspective. Once perspective shifts, meaning has to shift with it. Not emotional meaning, Structural meaning, because meaning at cosmic scale cannot depend on experience. Experience is too brief, too local, too fragile. If meaning required witnesses, most of the universe would be meaningless. That is not how reality works. Meaning at this scale is not about what is felt. It is about what persists. Andromeda matters because it persists. Its mass persists. Its gravity persists. Its influence persists across spans of time that erase everything human. This reframes humility. Not humility as modesty, humility as accuracy. An accurate understanding of where we stand relative to processes that do not acknowledge us. Human culture often treats humility as a moral posture, John. At cosmic scale, humility is informational. It is the recognition that importance does not require attention, that consequence does not require awareness, that outcomes do not wait for understanding. This is uncomfortable because it removes a subtle privilege, the privilege of relevance. We are accustomed to believing that if something matters, it must intersect our lives. Scale dissolves that belief. The Andromeda merger will reshape the Milky Way. That reshaping is meaningful. It will not matter to us. Both statements are true. Holding them together requires abandoning a deeply ingrained habit, the habit of equating meaning with impact on experience. Scale demands a different equation. Meaning equals persistence multiplied by inevitability. By that measure, Andromeda matters profoundly. It defines structure far beyond any moment. Human history will come and go without altering that structure. This is not a dismissal of human value. It is a clarification of category. Human value exists at human scale. Cosmic structure exists at cosmic scale. Confusing the two leads to distortion. We either inflate our importance unrealistically or dismiss the universe as irrelevant. Both responses are defensive. Scale offers a third option: alignment. Alignment with reality as it is, not as it flatters us. The Andromeda merger is not a lesson in insignificance. It is a lesson in proportion. Proportion restores clarity. It shows where attention is useful and where it is symbolic. At cosmic scale, attention is symbolic. Observation does not influence outcome. Understanding does not redirect process. This does not make understanding pointless. It makes it honest. Honest understanding is not always empowering. Sometimes it is orienting. Orientation answers a different question. Not, what can we do? But, where are we? Where we are, in this case, is inside a process too large to respond to. We are not participants. We are transients. That transience is not failure. It is condition. Everything living is transient relative to cosmic timescales. What persists are structures, gravity, mass, time. Those are the currencies of the universe. Human categories do not exchange well at that scale. Words like soon and later lose precision. Words like close and far lose relevance. What remains are constraints. Constraints determine outcomes. Andromeda constrains the future of the Milky Way. That constraint exists regardless of interpretation. This changes how humility functions. Humility is no longer about minimizing oneself. It is about placing oneself correctly. Correct placement avoids both arrogance and despair. Arrogance assumes control. Despair assumes meaninglessness. Scale allows neither. It shows that control is limited and meaning is structural. Structure does not care how it is perceived, but it exists anyway. This is where many people feel a sense of loss, a loss of narrative centrality. Stories place characters at the center. The universe does not. That loss can feel like emptiness. It is not. It is replacement. Narrative centrality is replaced with structural belonging. We are not the point of the universe. We are part of it, not metaphorically, physically. The atoms in our bodies were shaped by cosmic processes long before Earth existed. The future atoms of the Milky Way will be shaped by Andromeda long after we are gone. This continuity exists regardless of awareness. Awareness intersects it briefly. That brief intersection does not reduce continuity. It highlights it. Understanding scale does not shrink meaning. It redistributes it, meaning no longer clusters around moments. It stretches across eras. That stretch is difficult to feel, but it is accurate. The Andromeda merger is meaningful, not because it will look dramatic. It is meaningful because it resolves structure. Structure resolution is the universe's long-term behavior. It reduces fragmentation. It concentrates mass. It simplifies large-scale arrangement. This simplification is not aesthetic. It is physical. The universe trends toward fewer, larger systems, not because of design, because gravity eliminates alternatives. Andromeda is part of that elimination. This brings humility into focus again. Humility here is not about being small. It is about being temporary. Temporary things can still matter. They matter locally. They matter briefly. They do not define the whole. That does not diminish them. It situates them. The discomfort people feel when confronting Andromeda is not fear of destruction. It is discomfort with non-centrality, with the realization that some of the most important processes do not include us as stakeholders. This is a difficult realization because modern thinking often equates importance with inclusion. If we are not included, we assume something does not matter. Scale shows that inclusion is optional. Structure is not. The universe does not organize itself around consciousness. Consciousness emerges within it, incidentally. That emergence is remarkable, but it does not grant authority. Understanding this avoids two extremes. The extreme of anthropocentrism, believing the universe revolves around us, and the extreme of nihilism, believing nothing matters because we do not matter universally. Scale offers a middle ground. Things matter differently at different scales. Human actions matter within human systems. Galactic processes matter within cosmic systems. Confusing the two leads to false conclusions. The Andromeda merger is a cosmic process. Judging it by human relevance misses its meaning entirely. Its meaning lies in what it reveals about how reality organizes itself. Slowly, relentlessly, without intention. This is where humility becomes stabilizing rather than diminishing. It removes the pressure to assign personal relevance to everything. Not everything is about us. That does not make it empty. It makes it larger, larger than narrative, larger than experience, larger than memory. Andromeda will merge with the Milky Way, whether or not anyone remembers the Milky Way existed. That fact is not tragic. It is neutral. Neutrality is often mistaken for coldness. It is not cold. It is consistent. Consistency across time is the universe's defining trait. Gravity does not change its mind. Time does not reverse. Structure resolves. Understanding this does not strip meaning away. It anchors it. Meaning becomes something that exists independently of feeling. That is difficult to accept, but it is also freeing. It frees us from the burden of needing to matter at every scale. We matter where we act. We observe where we cannot. That division is not failure. It is clarity. Andromeda teaches that clarity, not loudly, not urgently, but inevitably, by existing as a process already underway, indifferent to perception. That indifference is not an insult. It is a boundary that shows where human-centered thinking stops being useful. Beyond it, only physics remains. And physics does not negotiate. It unfolds, quietly, patiently, across spans of time that make experience optional. That is the perspective scale demands. Not despair, not awe, accuracy. Once perspective and meaning shift, interpretation has to change as well. Not interpretation of facts, interpretation of existence. Because scale does not just change what we know about the universe, it changes how knowledge itself functions. At human scale, knowledge is practical. You learn in order to act. You understand in order to intervene. At cosmic scale, knowledge becomes contextual. You learn in order to locate yourself accurately within something you cannot influence. This is a profound shift. It turns understanding from a tool into a lens that does not promise control, only clarity. The Andromeda merger forces this shift. Because it sits precisely at the boundary between comprehension and influence. We can comprehend it. We cannot influence it. That combination is rare in everyday life. Most things we understand are things we can affect, even slightly. Scale removes that assumption. It creates a category of truths that exist without actionable response. Truths that do not ask for solutions, only recognition. This is difficult because modern thinking often treats understanding as incomplete unless it leads to action. At cosmic scale, that expectation collapses. There is no action to take, no decision to make, no response that alters outcome. And yet, understanding still matters. It matters because it reshapes interpretation. Interpretation determines how we relate to reality. Without interpretation, facts remain disconnected. The Andromeda merger is not just a fact about galaxies. It is a fact about limits. Limits of agency, limits of relevance, limits of intuition. Recognizing those limits changes how we think beyond astronomy. It introduces a category of acceptance that is not passive but accurate. Acceptance here does not mean surrender. It means alignment with reality as it is structured. This alignment removes false expectations. It removes the expectation that everything important must involve us. It removes the expectation that knowledge always implies control. It removes the expectation that the future is always open. These expectations are comforting. They are also false at scale. Letting them go is uncomfortable, but stabilizing. It replaces illusion with proportion. Once this proportion is understood, observation itself changes. You stop asking, what will happen to us? And start asking, what is happening regardless of us? That question is less emotionally satisfying, but it is more accurate. Accuracy becomes the new form of meaning grounded in structure rather than experience. The universe does not reward emotional alignment. It rewards structural alignment. Understanding where you fit rather than how you feel becomes the goal. This reframes curiosity. Curiosity no longer seeks empowerment. It seeks orientation. Orientation answers a different set of questions. Where does this process sit in time? Where does it sit in scale? What does it reveal about how reality behaves when no one is watching? The Andromeda merger reveals that the universe favors continuity over moments. Processes matter more than events. Events are just visible peaks in processes that began long before. The collision we imagine is an event. The merger is a process. The process is what matters. Events distract us because they are dramatic. Processes matter because they are decisive. Scale shifts attention from events to processes. This shift changes how we interpret not just astronomy, but time itself. Time stops being a sequence of moments. It becomes a medium through which structure resolves. This is a subtle but profound change. When time is seen as medium rather than sequence, urgency fades. What matters is not when something happens. What matters is whether it can be avoided. At cosmic scale, many things cannot. Andromeda is one of them. Understanding this changes how we think about the future. The future stops being a canvas. It becomes a corridor, wide in the past, narrowing toward resolution. The present is not a branching point, it is a passage. This does not remove uncertainty completely. Details remain unpredictable, but the category of outcome is fixed. That distinction between detail and structure is crucial. Human intuition often confuses the two. We assume that unpredictability at the detail level implies unpredictability at the outcome level. At cosmic scale, the opposite is true. Details are chaotic. Outcomes are stable. The Andromeda merger is stable, not because we know every interaction, but because gravity has already eliminated alternatives. This realization changes how we interpret scale itself. Scale is no longer just size. It is constraint. The larger the scale, the stronger the constraints. At small scales, freedom exists. At large scales, freedom disappears. This inversion is counterintuitive. We imagine that bigger systems have more flexibility. In reality, they have less. They are locked into fewer outcomes. Understanding this reshapes expectations. You stop looking for drama. You stop expecting turning points. You start looking for alignment. Alignment between mass and motion. Alignment between structure and time. Andromeda is aligned with the Milky Way's future. That alignment is not emotional, it is physical. This also changes how we interpret insignificance. Insignificance is often framed as lack of importance. Scale reframes it as lack of influence. Those are not the same. We may lack influence at cosmic scale. That does not make the processes meaningless. It means they are independent. Independence from observers is not emptiness. It is autonomy. The universe is autonomous. It does not require validation. Understanding this removes a subtle anxiety. The anxiety that everything must involve us to matter. Once that anxiety dissolves, observation becomes calmer, less reactive, more accurate. You no longer need cosmic events to justify emotional response. You can let them exist as structure. This calmness is often mistaken for detachment. It is not detachment. It is maturity of perspective, the ability to hold truths without demanding relevance. This is what scale ultimately teaches. Not despair, not awe, but restraint. Restraint in interpretation, restraint in expectation, restraint in emotional projection. The universe does not perform, it resolves. Andromeda does not threaten, it constrains. Understanding that difference prevents misinterpretation. It prevents turning cosmic processes into narratives they do not belong to. This restraint also protects against exaggeration. The Andromeda merger is not an apocalypse. It is not a disaster. It is not a warning. It is a structural outcome. Treating it as anything else distorts understanding. Scale demands accuracy over excitement, accuracy over immediacy, accuracy over relevance. This does not make the universe boring. It makes it honest. Honesty at scale is quiet. It does not shout. It does not escalate. It persists. The Andromeda merger persists as a fact, regardless of interpretation. Understanding it does not change it, but it changes us. It changes how we think about future, about importance, about what it means for something to be already happening. Already happening does not mean visible. It means constrained. The Milky Way's future is constrained. That is the core truth. Everything else is detail. Once this is understood, the phrase far away loses its power. Distance becomes descriptive, not protective. It tells you how long light takes to travel. It does not tell you how separate systems are. Separation is defined by structure, not meters. Andromeda is not separate. It is already part of the same gravitational solution. That solution is unfolding now, quietly, without urgency, without audience. This understanding does not demand emotional response. It demands intellectual honesty, honesty about scale, honesty about limits, honesty about the difference between what matters to us and what matters structurally. Once those categories are separated, confusion dissolves, fear dissolves, exaggeration dissolves. What remains is clarity. Clarity about how the universe behaves when experience is removed from the equation. Clarity about why some truths feel unsettling, not because they are dangerous, but because they are indifferent. Indifference is not hostility. It is neutrality at scale. The Andromeda merger is neutral. It is not for us or against us. It simply is. That is will continue long after observation ends. Understanding that does not diminish meaning. It places meaning where it belongs, in structure, in persistence, in inevitability. And that placement changes how we observe everything else, not as participants in every story, but as brief witnesses inside processes that do not require us to exist. That is not smallness. That is accuracy. And accuracy is the final gift scale offers. At the end of scale, there is no revelation. There is no twist. There is only acceptance, not emotional acceptance, structural acceptance, the kind that comes from understanding how reality behaves when it is not shaped around perception. The Andromeda merger does not end in a moment. It does not arrive. It does not announce itself. it resolves. That distinction matters. We are conditioned to think in arrivals. Arrivals imply anticipation. They imply thresholds. They imply significance concentrated in time. Cosmic processes do not work that way. Their significance is distributed, stretched across eras, diluted so evenly that no single moment can carry it. This is why the future of the Milky Way does not feel dramatic. Drama requires compression. Scale stretches everything, meaning included. When something unfolds slowly enough, it stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like a condition. Andromeda is a condition, not a threat, not a warning, not a countdown, a condition already in effect. That realization reframes everything that came before. The question is no longer when it will happen. The question becomes what it means that it already has. What it means that the future can exist as constraint rather than surprise. What it means that certainty does not require immediacy. What it means that distance does not guarantee separation. At human scale, separation feels real. At cosmic scale, separation is temporary. Mass does not remain isolated. It accumulates. Gravity does not allow long-term independence. It only allows delay. Andromeda is not close because it is near. It is close because escape is gone. That is the quiet truth running through everything discussed so far. Once you understand that, the word collision becomes misleading. Collisions imply accident. This is not an accident. It is resolution. Resolution of a system that has been bound for billions of years. Resolution that does not care about observation. Resolution that does not wait for significance. The universe does not prioritize moments. It prioritizes outcomes. Outcomes emerge from structure. Structure emerges from gravity. Gravity emerges from mass, and mass does not negotiate. This chain removes emotion step by step, not to make reality cold, but to make it accurate. Accuracy at scale is unemotional by necessity. Emotion depends on immediacy. Scale dissolves immediacy. What remains is continuity. Continuity is not exciting. It is relentless. That relentlessness is what gives the universe its shape. Galaxies form. They interact. They merge, not as spectacle, as process. Andromeda is not special in this. The Milky Way is not special in this. Their interaction is ordinary at cosmic scale, which is precisely why it matters. Ordinary outcomes reveal rules. Exceptional outcomes distract from them. The rule here is simple. Once mass binds, time resolves it. Everything else is detail. This rule applies everywhere in the universe. Clusters of galaxies form the same way. Structures grow the same way. Scale magnifies inevitability. The larger the scale, the fewer outcomes remain possible. This is the final inversion of intuition. We expect bigger things to have more freedom. In reality, they have less. Freedom exists at the edges. Constraint dominates at the center. Andromeda and the Milky Way are no longer at the edges of possibility. They are at the center of a shared gravitational solution. That solution will unfold, whether or not it is ever witnessed again. This brings us to the last uncomfortable implication, that the universe does not build toward us. We are not the destination of cosmic processes. We are incidental, not irrelevant. Incidental. There is a difference. Irrelevant implies meaninglessness. Incidental implies non-centrality. Scale demands we accept non-centrality, not as loss, but as placement. Correct placement removes false expectations. It removes the expectation that reality must perform for us. It removes the expectation that significance must be felt. It removes the expectation that understanding must grant control. Those expectations collapse under scale. What replaces them is orientation. Orientation answers a simpler, more honest question. Where are we inside this? The answer, in this case, is clear. We are inside a process that began long before us and will continue long after. We are not ahead of it. We are not behind it. We are passing through a moment that feels static only because it is stretched beyond perception. This reframes the idea of now. Now is not a turning point. It is not a moment of choice. It is a cross-section. a thin slice through inevitability. The Andromeda merger exists on both sides of now, before it, after it. Our presence does not define it. It merely intersects it. That intersection is brief, but it is enough to notice something important. That reality does not require urgency to be decisive. That distance does not equal independence. That futures can exist as constraints long before they are visible. Once this is understood, fear dissolves. Not because the universe is safe, but because fear is the wrong response. Fear assumes a threat that can be avoided. Nothing about this can be avoided. Avoidance is not the category. Understanding is. Understanding what scale removes and what it leaves behind. It removes agency at large scales. It leaves structure. It removes immediacy. It leaves inevitability. It removes narrative. It leaves process. The Andromeda merger is a process, already underway, already shaping the long-term structure of our galaxy, already indifferent to whether anyone notices. This indifference is not cruelty. It is neutrality. The universe is neutral at scale. It does not optimize for experience. It optimizes for resolution. Resolution happens slowly, quietly, without regard for witnesses. This is why the most accurate way to think about Andromeda is not as something that will happen, but as something that is happening too slowly to feel. That distinction matters because it reveals the true failure of the phrase far away. Far away suggests separation. There is no separation here, only delay. Delay between cause and effect. Delay between binding and resolution. Delay between inevitability and visibility. Delay creates comfort, but comfort is not accuracy. Accuracy demands we recognize what delay hides. Andromeda is already part of the Milky Way's future structure. That future is not open, it is constrained. That constraint is the signal, not a radio signal, not a flash of light, a structural signal, one that tells us how the universe actually works, not loudly, not urgently, but persistently. Understanding that signal does not change anything. It changes how we think. It changes how we place ourselves within reality. It removes the need to exaggerate cosmic events into threats. It removes the temptation to project human urgency onto inhuman timescales. It replaces reaction with clarity. Clarity is the final outcome of scale. Not awe, not fear. Clarity. Clarity about limits. Clarity about structure. Clarity about the fact that some things are already decided long before they arrive. The Andromeda merger is one of those things, not because it is dramatic, but because gravity does not allow alternatives. This is the quiet ending scale provides. No warning, no climax, just the recognition that the universe resolves itself, whether or not we are present to see it, and that our brief awareness of this process does not diminish it. It situates us correctly. Between beginnings we did not witness and endings we will not reach, inside a process already underway. That is what it means when we say, Andromeda is already too close. Not because it threatens us, but because distance has already stopped meaning what we think it means, and the universe has already moved on without asking whether we noticed. That is not terrifying. It is precise. And precision, at this scale, is the only honest conclusion.